History says power was built by kings, emperors, and dictators. Cute story. Now meet the people actually standing beside them. Horse politicians, royal butt assistants, poison experts, fake officers, human alarm clocks, and servants whose job descriptions sound like dares. These are 32 of the strangest people who ever served power, and somehow every palace gets weirder than the last. 1. Incitatus was not just Caligula's favorite racehorse. According to Roman writers, this animal lived like Rome's richest aristocrat, while actual Romans were out there sweating, starving, and pretending marble made everything classy. His stable was supposedly marble, his feeding trough was ivory, his blankets were imperial purple, and his collars sparkled with jewels because apparently even horses needed drip in Caligula's Rome. Servants attended him, guests were invited to banquets in his name, and some accounts claim Caligula wanted to make him consul, one of Rome's highest offices. Was he serious, or was he basically telling the Senate, "My horse is more qualified than you"? Historians still argue about that, and honestly, both options are brutal. Before big races, soldiers reportedly forced the neighborhood into silence so Incitatus could sleep. A horse had a bedtime security detail, very normal empire behavior. 2. In ancient Rome, if a politician wanted votes, he had to act like he personally remembered every citizen he passed in the street. The problem was that most elite Romans did not exactly have warm, database-level emotional storage for random voters named Marcus. So they used a nomenclator, a trained enslaved assistant whose job was to walk beside them and whisper names, family details, recent events, and useful gossip at exactly the right moment. That man is Lucius. His daughter just married. He hates your rival. Then the politician would beam and say, "Lucius, my friend, congratulations on the wedding," as if he had been following the family saga all year. It was basically facial recognition software wearing sandals. Cicero mentioned them, and for ambitious Romans, a nomenclator became almost mandatory. No serious political career was complete without a human cheat code whispering in your ear. 3. The Chevalier d'Eon was a soldier, diplomat, spy, and one of the most fascinating identity puzzles in 18th century Europe. Born Charles d'Eon de Beaumont in 1728, d'Eon served French kings as a military officer and secret agent, moving through elite courts with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much chaos they could cause. One famous story says d'Eon infiltrated Empress Elizabeth's Russian court while presenting as a woman, gaining access that ordinary diplomats could only dream of. For decades, d'Eon publicly lived as a man, fought in the 7 Years' War, and negotiated in London. Then d'Eon declared they had been assigned female at birth and demanded recognition as a woman. King Louis XVI accepted the claim and ordered d'Eon to dress as a woman. After d'Eon's death in 1810, doctors said the body was anatomically male. London had even run betting pools over the question. A spy so effective, even their identity felt like classified material. 4. The groom of the stool may sound like a polite furniture job, but no. This was one of the most awkwardly intimate positions in English royal history. His duty was to help the king during private bathroom business, including cleaning the royal backside. And somehow, instead of being the court's most humiliating punishment, this became one of the most desirable jobs in England. Why? Access. The groom was alone with the king when the king was unguarded, relaxed, and extremely unable to storm off dramatically. Secrets spilled, gossip flowed, political favors were discussed while the monarch sat there in maximum human vulnerability. Under Henry VIII, the groom became one of the king's closest confidants, almost like a therapist with worse working conditions. Noble families actually fought, bribed, and schemed to get their men into this role. Imagine risking your reputation for the chance to wipe a king. Medieval career networking was built different. 5. Lieutenant Kijé had one of the strangest careers in Russian military history, mostly because Lieutenant Kijé was not real. In the late 18th century, a scribe made a clerical mistake and accidentally created a phantom officer in official paperwork. Emperor Paul I saw the name and approved a promotion, which created a tiny problem. Nobody wanted to tell the unpredictable, paranoid emperor that he had just promoted a man who existed only because someone's pen had betrayed reality. So the bureaucracy did what bureaucracy does best. It continued the nonsense with full confidence. Kijé was promoted, praised, granted honors, and even given an official marriage nobody attended, because the groom was imaginary. At one point, he was supposedly exiled to Siberia, where he presumably failed to exist in much colder conditions. The legend became so famous that Sergei Prokofiev later composed music about him. A fake officer had a better documented career than many real ones. 6. The Royal Swan Marker is a real British royal position, and yes, the job is basically counting the king's swans with ceremonial seriousness. The office comes from medieval laws claiming that unmarked mute swans in open waters of England and Wales belong to the crown. Every year, during swan upping, the Royal Swan Marker leads boats up the Thames, where teams catch swans, check their health, weigh them, measure them, and record the numbers like the kingdom depends on it. The crews wear special uniforms, royal flags fly, and when someone spots a swan, the cry goes up, "All up." Suddenly it feels less like bird conservation and more like a tiny naval invasion. In the Middle Ages, swans were luxury food for royal banquets, so counting them made practical sense. Today, nobody is roasting royal swans, thankfully. It is about conservation, tradition, and keeping one of Britain's most wonderfully absurd monarchy jobs alive. 7. The royal herb strewer had one beautifully simple job: walk ahead of the monarch and throw nice-smelling herbs on the floor because everything else smelled like a biological attack. The position appeared in the English court around 1660 when London and even royal palaces had a serious fragrance problem. Open sewers, dirty streets, animal waste, rotting food, and limited bathing created an atmosphere that could probably slap you in the face from across the courtyard. So the crown hired a human air freshener. The herb strewer scattered lavender, rosemary, thyme, rose petals, and other fragrant plants to build a tiny scented shield between royal noses and 17th century reality. This was not just decorative. It was used at ceremonies, coronations, and formal events, with salary and status attached. The role last appeared formally at King George IV's coronation in 1821. After that, Britain apparently decided professional floor potpourri had served the empire long enough. 8. Frederick William I of Prussia cared about the army, government budgets, and discipline, but his true obsession was tall soldiers. He created the Potsdam Giants, also known as the Lange Curls, an elite regiment made up of men over 6 feet tall, which in the early 18th century was basically human skyscraper territory. Recruitment became a continent-wide obsession. His agents searched Europe for tall men, and when polite offers failed, they used trickery, drugs, kidnapping, and diplomatic pressure. Nothing says stable monarchy like abducting unusually large strangers for your personal collection. The king even tried pairing tall soldiers with tall women in hopes of breeding even taller future recruits, because apparently he saw genetics as a military procurement program. He spent absurd sums on the regiment and loved watching them parade, but almost never risked them in battle. They were too precious to fight. They were soldiers, trophies, and emotional support giants all at once. 9. The royal food taster may be the most terrifying job ever disguised as fine dining. The system was simple. The ruler gets food, another person eats it first, and then everyone waits to see whether lunch becomes a murder investigation. If the taster survives, bon appétit. If not, congratulations, the security system worked exactly once. Ancient Rome had these tasters, called praegustatores, and Emperor Claudius had one named Halitus. Unfortunately for Claudius, Halitus may have been involved in the poisoning plot that killed him, which is a pretty major failure for the Taste First Save Emperor department. Stalin used food tasters. Hitler had a group of women forced to sample his meals before he ate. Similar precautions reportedly still exist in modern modified forms for some leaders. Just imagine that atmosphere at dinner. One person chews, the ruler stares, and both silently wonder whether the soup has career-ending consequences. 10. Prince Mikhail Golitsyn was born into one of Russia's great noble families, educated, polished, and on track for a respectable aristocratic life. Then he married a Catholic Italian woman abroad, which enraged Empress Anna of Russia so much that she decided ordinary punishment was simply too boring. She stripped him of status and turned him into a court jester, not symbolically, literally. Golitsyn was forced to sit in a huge basket at court and pretend to be a hen hatching eggs, clucking and performing for the amusement of the aristocracy. It was humiliation served with feathers. Then came Anna's masterpiece of cruelty, the Ice Palace Wedding of 1740. She built an entire palace of ice on the frozen Neva River, forced Golitsyn to marry another court performer in a mock ceremony, and locked them inside overnight. A prince became a chicken act because he married the wrong woman. Russian court politics did not do mild. 11. The Comte de Saint-Germain entered the courts of 18th century Europe like a man who had read every conspiracy theory and decided to become all of them at once. At the court of Louis XV, he appeared charming, elegant, multilingual, talented, and mysteriously ageless. Then he began casually claiming he was several hundred years old. He said he had known Cleopatra, spoken with Jesus Christ at the wedding at Cana, and discovered secrets of eternal life through alchemy. Normally, that would get you escorted out. Instead, people were fascinated. Saint-Germain spoke multiple languages, played music brilliantly, painted well, and seemed impossible to pin down. Voltaire joked that he was the man who knew everything and never died. Louis XV gave him palace apartments and even used him for diplomacy. After his reported death in 1784, alleged sightings continued for years. Either he was a legendary fraud, or he is still somewhere today, overdressed and refusing to explain his skincare routine. 12. Wei Zhongxian began as a eunuch in the Ming court and somehow climbed from gambling servant to the most powerful man in China, mainly because the emperor had discovered a more exciting hobby than governing. Carpentry. The Tianqi emperor ruled from 1620 to 1627, but his real passion was building miniature palaces, furniture, and detailed wooden objects. While he was busy sanding table legs, Wei Zhongxian quietly took over the empire. He controlled the secret police, destroyed enemies, censored scholars, and had critics tortured or executed by the thousands. Then, because subtlety had clearly left the building, he ordered temples built in his own honor and expected officials to worship him like a god. Thousands bowed before his portrait, while the actual emperor was somewhere in a workshop making another little wooden masterpiece. When Tianqi died, the next emperor moved against Wei immediately. Wei hanged himself before punishment arrived. China nearly collapsed because one ruler preferred woodworking to ruling. 13. Dr. Theodor Morell was Hitler's personal physician from 1936 until near the end of World War II, and his treatment plan looked less like medicine and more like a chemistry drawer having a nervous breakdown. Morell injected Hitler constantly, sometimes many times a day, with substances that included methamphetamine, oxycodone, cocaine, hormone extracts, and mysterious formulas written in his notes as if even he did not want future historians asking questions. He also gave pills containing strychnine and bizarre bacterial preparations. Other Nazi leaders hated him, mocked his smell, and called him the Reich injection master. Hitler, however, trusted him completely and became heavily dependent on his treatments. By the final years, Hitler's health was visibly collapsing, his hands trembled, and many historians believe Morell's drug routine made nearly everything worse. The man responsible for keeping the dictator functional may have been slowly wrecking him from the inside with medical confidence and terrible hygiene. 14. Perkio was a court dwarf in early 18th century Heidelberg, serving Elector Palatine Charles III Philip, and his official responsibility was guarding the Great Heidelberg Tun, a gigantic wine barrel holding more than 200,000 liters. That is not a wine barrel. That is a small inland sea with wooden walls. Perkio became the perfect mascot for it. Legend says he drank 5 to 8 gallons of wine every day and somehow remained cheerful, functional, and not immediately dead. Whenever someone offered him more, he answered, "Perché no?" meaning, "why not?" in Italian, and that phrase supposedly gave him his name. He became famous as the tiny guardian of a monstrous barrel, a 3-foot man protecting enough alcohol to drown a banquet hall. The best part of the legend says he lived for decades on wine, then drank 1 glass of water and died soon after. Heidelberg loved the story so much that his wooden statue still stands in the castle. 15. Emperor Tiberius took astrology very seriously, but his hiring process for astrologers had a small downside. If he thought you were fake, he might throw you off a cliff. At his villa on Capri, Tiberius would consult astrologers about the future, and if their predictions seemed weak or suspicious, they were reportedly tossed into the sea below. That is one way to reduce bad reviews. Then came Thrasyllus of Mendes, an Egyptian astrologer who arrived knowing exactly how previous candidates had exited the interview. Tiberius liked his readings, then gave him one final test. He asked Thrasyllus to read his own immediate future. Thrasyllus studied the signs, turned pale, and said he saw himself in terrible danger right now. Perfect answer. He was standing beside a ruler who was probably deciding whether to murder him. Tiberius was impressed and spared him. Thrasyllus became his trusted astrologer. He saved his life by predicting the most obvious danger in the room with spectacular timing. 16. Versailles looked like the peak of royal elegance, but behind all that gold, silk, and dramatic ceiling art, the palace had an enemy army: insects. Louis XIV's court was enormous, crowded, poorly ventilated in places, and constantly full of food, waste, fabric, bodies, pets, and perfume, desperately trying to lie about all of it. So among the thousands of royal servants, there were people assigned to deal with vermin and insects in the royal chambers. Imagine being hired by the Sun King and realizing your enemy is not Spain or Austria, but palace cockroaches. Versailles was full of hyper-specific jobs like this. One servant handled gloves, another the nightcap, another a sleeve, and everyone had rank, salary, and ritual importance. The court employed around 10,000 people, many with duties so narrow their entire role could be summarized as hand object to king at sacred moment. Versailles was a palace, yes, but also a bureaucratic machine where even bugs had official opponents. 17. Narses was a eunuch in the Byzantine court of Justinian I, so by the expectations of his time, he should have stayed safely inside the palace managing imperial affairs. Instead, he became one of the greatest military commanders in Roman history. When Belisarius struggled to complete the reconquest of Italy from the Ostrogoths, Justinian sent Narses, who was already over 70. Most people that age are avoiding stairs. Narses marched into Italy and crushed the Gothic kingdom with discipline, strategy, and terrifying competence. His soldiers respected him because he paid them and treated them fairly, which, shockingly, makes armies happier. Justinian trusted him because as a eunuch, Narses could not claim the throne. After conquering Italy, he governed it for years. When Empress Sophia later mocked him by sending a golden spindle and suggesting he return to women's work, Narses reportedly said he would spin her a thread she could never unravel. That was not embroidery talk. That was a threat. 18. In April 1817, a mysterious young woman appeared near Bristol, England, speaking no English, wearing unusual clothing, and acting as if British village life was the strangest thing she had ever seen. Local elites were instantly hooked. Then a Portuguese sailor conveniently claimed he could understand her and translated her story. She was Princess Caribou from the island of Java-Su, kidnapped by pirates and somehow dumped in England. British high society ate it up with a silver spoon. She was invited into manor houses, studied by scholars, admired by aristocrats, and treated like exotic royalty. She danced, prayed to her own god, wrote in a strange script, and performed mystery like a full-time profession. Then a Bristol boarding house owner saw her image in a newspaper and recognized her immediately as Mary Baker, a former servant from Devon who enjoyed inventing languages and personas. She had fooled professors and aristocrats with pure confidence. Honestly, that is not fraud. That is theater with consequences. 19. Sir Geoffrey Hudson was introduced to Queen Henrietta Maria in one of the most bizarre royal presentations imaginable. He popped out of a pie. Around 1619, Geoffrey was born with dwarfism, and when he was first brought before the Queen, he stood about 18 inches tall. At a banquet, a huge pie was opened, and out came a tiny, finely dressed boy as a living gift. The Queen was delighted because apparently royal entertainment had no normal setting. Geoffrey remained at court, grew to about 3.5 feet, was knighted and became far more than a novelty. He traveled with the Queen and carried himself with serious pride. When a courtier named William Crofts mocked him one time too many, Geoffrey challenged him to a pistol duel. Crofts arrived with a water squirter as a joke. Geoffrey arrived with a real pistol and killed him. Later, Geoffrey was captured by Barbary pirates and enslaved for 25 years. Pie entrance, deadly duel, pirate captivity. This man's life was absurdly cinematic. 20. From 1988 to 2001, Kim Jong-il employed a Japanese chef known as Kenji Fujimoto as his personal sushi master, which sounds glamorous until you remember the boss was a North Korean dictator. Fujimoto was not just slicing tuna in a quiet kitchen. He was sent around the world on food missions, buying tuna in Japan, pork in Denmark, caviar in Iran, and horse meat in Uzbekistan. He was basically a culinary spy with a shopping list and extremely poor job security. Inside Kim's private world, Fujimoto saw luxury, parties, expensive liquor, and the constant terror of knowing one wrong move could make him vanish. In 2001, he spotted an escape route disguised as seafood. He told Kim he needed to go to Japan to buy a specific sea urchin for dinner. Kim approved it. Fujimoto boarded the plane, landed in Japan, and never returned. He escaped a dictatorship with the world's greatest "I need ingredients" excuse. 21. John Dee was Queen Elizabeth I's mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, advisor, occult researcher, and occasional intelligence asset because apparently one job title was not enough for the 16th century's strangest genius. Dee helped choose the date of Elizabeth's coronation using astrology, advised her on exploration and politics, and also spent years trying to communicate with angels through crystal balls and rituals with medium Edward Kelly. He claimed the angels dictated an entire language, now known as Enochian. That alone would make him memorable. But Dee also worked in espionage for the crown, sending coded reports back to Elizabeth. His signature mark reportedly included 2 circles symbolizing the Queen's eyes, meaning, "for your eyes only," followed by the number 7. Yes, John Dee was signing secret reports as 007 more than 3 centuries before James Bond existed. Whether Ian Fleming drew from Dee or not, the coincidence is almost rude. 22. Locusta was not merely a poisoner. She was basically the Roman Empire's official murder chemist under Nero. Her rise began when Agrippina, mother of Nero, allegedly hired her to help poison Emperor Claudius with mushrooms so Nero could take the throne. Once Nero became emperor, Locusta turned into his favorite solution for relatives who were inconveniently alive. When Nero wanted his stepbrother Britannicus dead, she prepared the poison. The first dose worked too slowly, so Nero beat her and demanded something faster, because apparently even assassination had performance reviews. Locusta delivered. As payment, Nero pardoned her past crimes, gave her wealth and estates, and reportedly allowed her to train students in poisoning. Imagine a government-supported academy where the curriculum is how to kill people quietly at dinner. Her career ended only after Nero fell and Galba had her executed. For years, though, Locusta was Rome's deadliest employee with imperial benefits. 23. In 1514, King Manuel I of Portugal sent Pope Leo X a diplomatic gift that was impossible to ignore: a white Indian elephant named Hanno. The Pope adored him. Hanno became a 4-ton Vatican celebrity, living in the papal gardens with attendants, fine food, and public appearances decorated in gold and jewels. He could reportedly perform tricks, dance, and spray water, which made him more popular than many church officials. Leo loved this elephant with almost embarrassing intensity. When Hanno became ill in 1516, the Pope summoned doctors who treated him with a gold-infused laxative. Because when medicine fails, apparently just add luxury metal. Hanno died soon after, and Leo was devastated enough to commission Raphael to create a memorial image of him. Critics of the papacy looked at the Pope publicly mourning a pampered elephant, while Europe simmered with religious anger and thought, yes, this system seems completely fine. The Reformation energy was already in the room. 24. The Habsburg court treated many things with ceremony, but few traditions are more weirdly intense than the royal napkin fold. At Austrian state banquets, napkins were folded using a complex technique so precise and visually impressive that it became a closely guarded court secret. This was not grandma showing off at Christmas dinner. This was classified linen technology. The method, known as the Habsburg fold, was reportedly known to only 2 people at any given time. Just 2. In the whole imperial world. These chosen napkin masters guarded the skill like a national defense secret and had to pass it on before retiring or dying. Wars came, revolutions came. The empire collapsed, monarchs disappeared. But the sacred napkin knowledge endured like the world's strangest spy network. Somewhere, the secret of making cloth sit dramatically on a table survived what armies could not. History is full of priorities, and sometimes the priority is apparently napkin origami. 25. Roland le Couture may have had the most efficient royal contract in medieval England. In the 12th century, under King Henry II, Roland held land in Suffolk in exchange for performing one specific act every Christmas: 1 jump, 1 whistle, and 1 fart. That was the duty. Not guarding a castle, not leading troops, not advising the crown. Just arrive once a year, jump, whistle, release the royal finale, and go home. For this contribution to national culture, he received a manor and more than 100 acres of land. Many knights risked death in battle for worse rewards. Peasants worked themselves half into the grave and got mud. Roland had a country estate because he could produce scheduled flatulence with confidence. Medieval society was brutal, unfair, and often ridiculous. But you have to admire a man who found the ultimate loophole. 1 fart a year, lifetime property benefits. That is not a job. That is a miracle. 26. When Peter the Great returned from Western Europe in 1698, he brought Russia a modernization plan, and somehow the first victim was facial hair. To Peter, the long beards worn by Russian nobles and traditionalists looked backward and un-European. So he declared war on beards with the intensity of a man personally offended by chin forests. Officials were stationed at Moscow's gates with razors, and bearded men could be stopped and shaved on the spot. For many Orthodox believers, shaving was not just embarrassing, it felt spiritually wrong. Peter did not care. Later he realized this obsession could make money, so he introduced a beard tax. Men who wanted to keep their beards had to pay and carry a copper token proving they had settled their facial hair debt. No token meant goodbye beard. The policy lasted for decades and was not fully repealed until 1772. Peter modernized Russia, yes, but he also turned mustache-adjacent paperwork into state policy. 27. Triboulet served as a jester to French kings Louis XII and Francis I, and he was famous for being dangerously funny, which is the only kind of funny that really mattered at court. One day, he pushed the privilege of comedy to suicidal levels by slapping King Francis on the backside in front of everyone. The king was not charmed. He sentenced Triboulet to death, which is a fairly strong workplace warning. But Francis gave him one last royal courtesy. He could choose how he wanted to die. Most people would collapse into panic. Triboulet saw the opening and calmly answered that he chose to die of old age. Perfect. The king laughed so hard that he spared him, commuting the death sentence to banishment. So Triboulet physically insulted a king, received a death sentence, and escaped execution using one joke. That is not just wit. That is comedy functioning as emergency armor. 28. The royal cock crower at the Hanoverian court sounds like a title invented during a drinking game, but it was a real role. His job was exactly what the name suggests: crow like a rooster to announce the time. Yes, clocks already existed. Yes, they worked. No, that did not stop someone from deciding the royal household needed a human barnyard alarm system. The cock crower would crouch down and perform rooster calls at scheduled moments, because apparently nothing says refined monarchy like a grown man going full farm animal in a palace corridor. According to one famous story, he once directed his enthusiastic crowing at the Prince of Wales, who found the performance less charming than expected. The prince had him dismissed. Imagine losing a paid royal job because you cock-a-doodle-dooed at the wrong aristocrat. Some people were fired for treason. This man was fired for weaponized rooster energy. 29. The whipping boy sounds like something from a cruel satire, but in some European royal courts, especially in England and France, it was a real institution. A noble-born boy was raised alongside a prince as his companion and classmate. Then came the catch. When the prince misbehaved, failed lessons, or acted like a spoiled royal disaster, the whipping boy was punished instead. Why? Because striking a future king was unacceptable, but striking his friend was apparently fine. The theory was that the prince would feel guilty watching someone he cared about suffer for his mistakes and would improve his behavior. That is a very optimistic view of young aristocrats with unlimited entitlement. In practice, it may have taught princes that consequences were something other people experienced nearby. Some whipping boys became close to their royal companions and later received titles, land, or influence. So yes, in a deeply twisted way, being beaten for a prince could become a career path. 30. Peter the Great did not only modernize Russia and build St. Petersburg, he also created one of history's strangest inner circles, the all-joking, all-drunken synod of fools and jesters. Founded when Peter was still a teenager, this group of companions and advisors staged outrageous parodies of the Russian Orthodox Church, complete with fake religious ranks, fake ceremonies, crude songs, and oceans of alcohol. Peter appointed mock popes, bishops, and cardinals, and the ceremonies were so vulgar that conservative Moscow society looked like it had swallowed a candle. This was not a harmless party club meeting once a year. The synod lasted for decades, and many members were genuinely close to Peter and influential in politics. Serious decisions could happen between drunken rituals and blasphemous jokes. The old nobility hated it. The church was horrified. Peter did not care. He ruled like a reformer, drank like a disaster, and used mockery as a political weapon. 31. Grigory Rasputin was a Siberian peasant with little formal education, wild eyes, a wilder beard, and an almost impossible talent for walking straight into the center of Russian power. By the early 20th century, he had become deeply trusted by Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra because he seemed able to ease the suffering of their son Alexei, who had hemophilia. Doctors could not explain it, and the desperate royal family clung to him. Rasputin used that access to influence appointments, court politics, and decisions far beyond anything a wandering holy man should have touched. Nobles hated him. Church figures distrusted him. Ordinary Russians saw either a saint, a devil, or the empire's creepiest warning sign. In 1916, aristocrats decided to kill him. The legendary version says they poisoned him, shot him, beat him, and dumped him in an icy river. Whether every detail is true or inflated, the myth became unstoppable. Rasputin turned dying into personal branding. 32. In 17th and 18th century England, rich aristocrats did not just travel with carriages and horses. They also had running footmen, athletic servants whose job was to run ahead of the carriage like human headlights with better calves. They cleared the road, scouted obstacles, paid tolls before the carriage arrived, and announced their master's approach. These men ran for miles, sometimes nearly as fast as the horses, wearing light livery and carrying a tall staff with a hollow silver ball at the top. Inside was a mix of wine and egg whites, basically an 18th century energy drink invented by people who thought texture was optional. The job was prestigious, and wealthy families even raced their footmen for sport and gambling. But it was brutal. Long-distance sprinting in bad weather could destroy the body, and some footmen reportedly collapsed and died from exhaustion. Eventually, roads improved, carriages got faster, and humans could no longer outrun rich people's vehicles. The profession disappeared, leaving only one perfect pub name behind: I am the only running footman. Now be honest. Which servant, advisor, jester, spy, poisoner, swan counter, or professionally employed human disaster did we criminally leave out? Drop the name in the comments and defend your choice like you are arguing at a royal court with your career on the line. Like the video if at least one job made you question civilization, and subscribe because history is clearly too ridiculous to trust to normal textbooks.